Hi, I'm Sterling Edwards. Thank you for joining me. Let's spend a few minutes discussing fog and how you paint fog. I will tell you this is one of the things that first attracted me to watercolors. I saw a gentleman painting a real drizzly, misty scene at an art show one time, and I was so impressed by the way he could just wet the paper and lay color in and let the paper and the water do half the work for him. I was an oil painter at the time, and I still am an oil painter. But that particular effect just really fascinated me, and I thought, I'm going to learn how to do that. So I set on a mission to do it. And I finally found a good way to paint fog that I want to share with you right now. Before I start the demonstration, let's take a look at some of the colors we're going to use and some of the materials we're going to use. If you come over to the palette, this is the palette I designed. This is Sterling Edwards Big Brush palette, and I've got just a nice variety of My Mary Blue colors. These are Italian paints. And every color on this palette is transparent except for one, and that's Payne's Gray. It's semi-opaque, but I use it in a very diluted manner, so it still has a good transparency to it. But the rest are all transparent, and I'll probably be using mostly blues and violets and a little bit of brown for this demonstration, maybe some green. I have two containers for water. One is for washing my brushes, and one is for adding clean water to my painting. And I have a roll of toilet tissue, which has about 5 feet of paper towel wrapped around it. It just makes a wonderful blotter for controlling the water in your brush. And when it gets dirty, just flip it over and use the other side. When it gets to where it weighs about 10 pounds, it'll hold 5 gallons of water. Toss it out and make a new one. They're very inexpensive. The brushes I'll be using are 1 inch and a 1/2 inch flat. These are the Sterling Edwards signature brushes. And I'll also be using probably a few of the round brushes and the rigger. They're very simple standard nylon brushes, and I'll be using some of these. Now these are brushes I designed. These are the Sterling Edwards blending and glazing brush. They come in 3 sizes. In fact, I'll probably use all 3 sizes, the small, medium, and the large. These have a very stiff bristle, and they're just excellent for blending edges, painting trees, getting some very neat effects. But when I'm painting fog in particular, I use these because I can really blend these soft edges out and get that hazy, misty background, foggy look. Other things I have are just a box of plain facial tissue, and I'm doing this demonstration on a piece of 300-pound Arches cold pressed paper. I'm using the Arches for this because it's got a little bit rougher texture than the Fabriano, which is what I usually use. Sometimes Arches is my preferred paper depending on the subject. Most of the time I use Fabriano, but in this case the Arches should serve me a little bit better because it's got a little bit rougher texture to it. So we'll see how it goes. Let's start by wetting the whole paper. Now, I'm not going to do a lot of drawing. In fact, let's just do a quick little sketch of a scene. Let's just suggest this is the edge of a field, and there's some trees over here, like this, just at the edge of the field. Maybe back here, there's more trees. Everything's very foggy and misty. Maybe there might even be a mountain back in the distance. Everything's foggy. Now, to make fog work, you have to overlap your shapes. Things that are very far off are extremely foggy and hard to see. As they get closer and closer, they become a little bit more colorful and a little bit more distinct. But typically, anything back in the fog is going to be very gray, very gray. You're not going to see a lot of color because fog is actually just trillions of droplets of water, and it's going to pretty much mute any colors or detail. You'll just see shapes and some very light suggested values of grays. So let's start by wetting the paper. In fact, we're going to wet the whole paper. And I'm using the 2-inch stiff bristle brush to do this. You can actually hear that brush pushing that water into the paper. Now let's start mixing some fog colors. If you come over to the palette, we're going to take some Golden Lake, which is a very clean golden color, a very transparent yellowish gold. Into that we're mixing some violet, so we get this very nice kind of a warm gray. And we're putting a little bit of blue into it. That's still too purple. Let's add more of the Golden Lake to it. Now we're getting a little bit more what we're looking for. It's more of a kind of a bluish gray with a little bit of a warmth and a little bit of cool, kind of a combination of both. That's the color of our fog right there. So let's do it. Let's start at the top and let's start working down as a graded wash. And we're just kind of working down towards the horizon. That was simple enough. There's my fog. Now let's put some things in the fog. Let's add a little bit of blue to that color. Now I'm going to use a little bit less water now, so I'm kind of using this blotter to get the excess water out of the brush. Let's suggest there's a mountain right up here. It kind of comes down. And the mountain gets lost into the fog down the valley. So we're letting it just kind of blend away. To help it blend away, I'm going to take another brush, another one of these bristle brushes. This is the medium blending and glazing brush. I'm squeezing most of the water out of it. Now I can come in and kind of just soften that edge. So we just see this very simple little faint suggestion of a hill back there. It looks like it's kind of peeking out of the fog, and down the valley it just gets lost. Now let's take some more of the same colors. The green, the cyan blue, the violet, and the golden lake. Let's start putting a few trees down the valley. Again, they're way back in the fog, so you're not going to see a lot of color. What you can see are just shapes, and they're going to be very, very faint little shapes. You're not going to see a lot of strong contrasting values or colors. You can just see suggestions. But you can already see how foggy that looks. We're really looking back into the mist now. And again, let's just take a brush and very lightly just kind of tickle the bottom edge a little bit, just to soften it. Already it's got a very, very foggy look. Now one thing that's going to make this look like fog is to have things get darker as they come forward. So let's add some more trees over here and this side. Now these trees are a little bit closer, so we're putting a little bit more color. I'm adding a little bit of green and blue to it. And again, I'm using darker, thicker paint. I'm using the blotter to get most of the water out of the brush, because I got some trees right here which are closer to us. And they're still kind of back in the fog a little bit. Let's put a little more violet in that and see how it looks. Everything's still gray, but it's not quite as gray. This is fun. It's fun stuff. So there's a nice little row of trees back there. Now, when you look at this, you really, it almost looks like a snow seam of fog at this point. We're going to put some grass in here. But let's just come in again, just very lightly, with a damp brush, just soften that bottom edge like you're kind of nestled down inside the fog. And already, if you look at this piece, it's very hazy and very misty. There's not a lot of definition, not a lot of color. And the paper is still relatively wet. So while it's wet, let's take some of this golden lake. Now let's come along the bottom with the same 2-inch bristle brush and start suggesting there's some grass and some weeds. This is just to the edge of a field. And take the bristle brush that's clean and barely damp. Use that to kind of soften that top edge, because this field kind of just drifts back into the fog also. Now let's take a little bit more of the brown and add some violet. What I'm trying to do at this point is just get darker and darker as I come forward. So I'm mixing a little darker mix of those two colors, this time a little more violet. And using that same bristle brush, we're going to pop in a few suggestions of weeds and things that are growing up out of the field. Now this is all done on wet paper, and we really, for the most part, only used 2 brushes. We could have used more, but I'm all in favor of using using bigger brushes and saving the smaller brushes for the very end if we decide to put some detail. This is the kind of painting, if I'd have gone in with a very small brush to begin with, we'd be working on that mountain and the paper would dry before we had a chance to get our shapes in. So there's a lot to be said for using large brushes. I'll make it even darker yet right in the foreground, because if I put a white mat on a painting like this, I want the white of the mat to have a nice dark border along the bottom, which kind of pushes the eye way back into the mist. And of course that bristle brush, I'm laying it down, just barely flicking it. It just makes the most wonderful grassy shapes. That's all the grass I need in this piece. Now, one thing I am going to do to really help push everything further back in the fog is put something dark in the foreground. Maybe there's a tree, or there could even be some fence posts or something. Let's just do some fence posts. Let's hope it's not too wet. I don't think it is. But let's take a dark brown and violet that hasn't got too much water in it. I'll put a little blue in that, make it even darker. The darker it is, the foggier that's going to look. Paper's still a little bit wet, so I'm getting some fuzzy edges, but that's okay. This is just a nice wet on wet watercolor. That kind of lends to the effect a little bit. And the end result is a very misty, gray, hazy kind of day. And you do see a meadow back here, and you see distant trees, and you see the trees way at the edge of the hill. Then you see the mountain in the background. But it has a lot of character, it has a lot of atmosphere. That's what we're looking for. So that's a simple little demonstration, but it really gives you an idea how you can take big brushes with an idea in mind where you're going with it on a nice quality paper and just start building in these shadows, these shadowy shapes. Don't forget to take that clean brush and kind of soften the bottom edge. So when you put your next shape in, it kind of silhouettes against it. And you wind up with a very, very interesting, hazy kind of painting. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have a chance, look at my website, sterlingedwards.com, and be sure to look at the calendar page while you're there. And there's also a new page called FAQ, Frequently Asked Questions, that come up at workshops. Check that out. That's brand new. A lot of times when I get interesting questions that they seem to be asked frequently, I put those on my website, so it's a good source of information. And I might be doing a workshop near you, who knows? I hope so. I'd love to meet you. Thank you very much.